Thank you, Scott Ritter, for participating in today's discussion. I have a very interesting question. The Chinese used to hate the Russians. Do you think so?
You talked about the Sino experts. And they said, the Chinese were mad at Russia in 1991, 1992 because Russians gave up.
Yeah.
And that's just an obvious statement of fact. Russia was the Soviet Union, and they were my enemy. But to defeat your enemy, you have to know your enemy.
Yeah. Mine too. I'm Cuban. You can only imagine.
And I had to study and study and study. So I got deep respect for Russia. And when I met with Russians in Votkinsk and elsewhere, I saw people who were proud of who they were. And what happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union is that Russians stopped being proud of who they were. They fell out of love with themselves. They started to have this doubt. They started to look to the West for alternatives to a failed society.
The 90s were horrible here. People tell stories of murders, and it was a crime. It was disgusting.
Was crazy. But the beauty, again, and I say this, and everybody goes, "You're Putin's puppet." Well, screw you. No, I'm just a historian. Vladimir Putin took the reins from a failed leader, Boris Yeltsin, and a failed nation, the Russian Federation, which was on the verge of total collapse.
It was.
In 25 years, the reversal he's done is, Russia is an amazing place today. They're on their feet. The Russian people love their country. And this is where I make the comparison with Americans, because 25 years, a quarter of a century, the Russian people today are so very proud of who they are. Yes, there's the economic aspect of it. There's a success, but I'm talking about the human aspect of it. Who are the Russian people? And the Russian people today meet you with an even gaze, not a superior gaze, but an even gaze, because they're like, we take second place to nobody. We're not saying we're better than you, but we're not going to let you say you're better than we are.
They're like satisfied, right? It's 100%. Like Putin. I know people are going to get mad when I say this, but the guy's got 80% approval in this country. And it's not a Russian poll. That's a German poll. And the Germans hate the Russians.
There's a reason, because he's done so much good for Russia. But now we come to the United States. We suffered, the Great Depression came in, the collapse of Wall Street, people jumping off of roofs. You go read John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath. And you see what America went through in the late 20s and the early 30s. There's a reason why Franklin Delano Roosevelt had to, create the construction corps to rebuild America, to bring in hope. But the Second World War came in, and we jumped up. That's why I think your comparison to the 50s. Americans in the 1950s were proud of being an American. They said, we survived the Great Depression. We helped win a world war. Our industry was indispensable in this. And we are proud of who we are. And we think we're good people. And Americans traveled back then, and the world loved Americans. I
love where you're going with this. You're saying the Russians, because they got through the 90s. Damn it, we got through that horrible crap.
It's like what we did. And they love themselves now. They built who they are on a foundation of sacrifice and sorrow. And Americans built who we are. And so my warning to the Russians is, however, look where America is today. If you don't respect this moment, and you don't abuse the pride you feel. You feel pride because you did something that was great. Continue to do great things, not at the expense of others. Do great things to the benefit of your own people to sustain this moment. America lost track. We had the American dream, but then we got involved in Vietnam. Then we got involved in these other things. And now we can transition. Russia has to make sure that Ukraine isn't its Vietnam. Okay. This Ukraine war has to come to an end. It can't drag on forever.
But let me ask you this though, and I've heard you talk about this, so I'm kind of feeding you this. if it's really the Europeans who are providing the weapons, who are providing the funding, who are providing the intel, who are providing the components, who are providing the guidance, are the Russians really at war with Ukraine, or are they really at war with Europe right now?
No, they're at war with Russia. Has called it out all along. Early on in the war, when again, I think Vladimir, he's done a couple amazing things with speeches. A couple years ago, he produced the Istanbul Communique, because nobody understood that there was actually a peace treaty. They were ready to rock. They were just told that Boris Yeltsin came in and said, this isn't going to work. But not Boris Yeltsin, Boris Johnson. But Putin went, hey, guys, it wasn't just simple, negotiations aren't working. We had an agreement signed, ready to go. But now it gets even further. Emmanuel Macron called and said, Ukraine can't agree to this agreement with a pistol to their head. Russia voluntarily withdrew. Russia did everything to try and create peace. That's when it was a Ukraine versus Russia thing. When the West killed the Istanbul Communique, when the United States passed new Lend-Lease, $50 billion, when NATO began retraining a new Ukrainian army and re-equipping it to continue the war, that's when the war became a war between Russia and the collective West. And the Russians recognized it. But again, the genius of Vladimir Putin is he always stayed focused on what Russia's objectives were. The objective was never to defeat Europe. The objective was actually never to occupy Ukraine. The objective was to bring stability and peace and prosperity to the Russian people of the afflicted regions, of the Donbass.
Zaporizhia and
not even Zaporizhia and Kherson, because Zaporizhia and Kherson, up until the referendum, Russia would, if the Istanbul Communique had been signed, Zaporizhia and Kherson would be Ukraine today. Russia had no territorial.
That's actually a great point. It's really worked against them. So what do you think? Happened? Let me get to the money part of this, because we're going to be running out of time in this segment pretty soon. But what do you think Mr. Putin told Mr. Xi that he's going to have to do in the coming months or whenever it is? What will Russia's move be now to try and finally put this, as Mr. Putin recently said, the war will be coming to an end soon?
Well, I think he pretty much said that. Real quick, after the dissolution of the Istanbul Communique, Putin stayed on course. And what he did is he managed all of the gross violations because Europe was a party to the conflict. The United States was a party to the conflict, but Russia never expanded the conflict because they wanted to keep conflict under control. And the other thing is the Ukrainians were trying to provoke Russia into doing something precipitous that would give NATO the ability to come in. Vladimir Putin and the Russian leadership, we never forget there is a Russian leadership. This isn't a dictatorship. The Russian leadership made the wise decision that Europe will defeat itself and Ukraine will be ground down and America will lose political interest and the war will be resolved this way over time. That's why they never talked about a calendar. But the problem is the West has crossed the last line. Sergei Karaganov in 2023 wrote a paper where he talked about, because Europe has declared war on Russia and they said strategic defeat of Russia, and we're seeking to implement the strategic defeat of Russia, that Russia couldn't be passive and had to respond. And he said it's time for Russia to use nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, preemptively. Yeah. And he wrote a paper, he said, America won't be willing to trade Boston for Poznan, so Russia will get away with it. Vladimir Putin at the time specifically said, no, that's not who we are. That's not what we are. That's not what we do. But then in 2024.
Karaganov is a hawk and Putin is kind of a dove.
He is. But then in 2024, because of people like the ones you play golf with are saying, hey, we got issues here because stuff's happening. Vladimir Putin, because he's not a dictator, brought Karaganov in to help guide Russia's to reshape strategic deterrence. In 2025, Russia published a new nuclear doctrine. It said if nuclear powers, the United States, NATO, use conventional weapons and supply it to a non-nuclear power who then uses that conventional capacity to strike the strategic depth of Russia, Russia is allowed to use nuclear weapons in response. That's the Karaganov influence. What happened now today is that the United States and Europe, primarily Europe, has given Ukraine the capacity through long-range drones, intelligence, etc., to strike the strategic depth of Russia. This is an unsustainable point. This is a different kind of war than happened before. They're not winning this war, Ukraine, but what they're doing is they've changed the paradigm so that if this continues unabated, real harm will come to Russia. Yeah. And so Vladimir Putin told Xi Jinping that this cannot continue. We will have to take actions to stop this, and I believe they will. I believe, again, I don't want to predict the future, but I do believe that decision-making centers are terms that the Russians use often. I believe decision-making centers in Ukraine will be hit decisively, and I believe decision-making centers in at least one European country will be hit, and Russia has identified that country and the decision-making centers. So I believe in the near future, and we've got a big thing coming up. We're going to a city, the second city of Russia. Some people say it's the first city of Russia,
St. Petersburg. Oh God, my wife. She was like, I was just talking to Tucker about this the other day, and he told me I think it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, and I can't wait to go there. So
but guess
my wife loves it. My wife is like, St. Petersburg is the most beautiful city you've ever taken.
And Ukraine's going to be firing drones there, and you think Russia's going to let them disrupt the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum? Drones fired out of Latvia. So I think the situation has defined itself, and I think the solution is obvious. And I think that Vladimir Putin educated Xi Jinping on the necessity of that. And Xi Jinping didn't have to say yes to Putin, although I'm sure he did. All he had to do is point to the conversations he had with Donald Trump about Taiwan and tell Vladimir Putin, Ukraine is to you what Taiwan is to us. You need to do what you need to do, and we support you 100%.
Yeah. I think there is a real similarity there. And I do get a sense, because there's so many planes that are not, it's just a pain in the ass. You're going to get on a plane and go on vacation with your family to Istanbul, and they tell you, sorry, the plane can't take off tonight because there's too many drones in the air. This happens all the time in Russia. You can't sleep at night because there's drone. It's not like it's crazy. It's not like, trust me, I'm not trying to say that if you live in Moscow, you feel like you're in a war zone, because it's not. But it's just an inconvenience, and you kind of know it's there, and you start feeling like, this is kind of something that we got to.
That's like a lullaby music to me. Pop, pop, pop. Oh yeah, baby, I'm going to sleep.
Because you're such a Marine. but so let me just get a full understanding of what you're saying. You think there's a real possibility that Russia's going to have to hit, and what was the word you used? Center? Center?
Decision-making centers.
Decision-making. What is it? What is that? What do you mean by that? What would they hit in Ukraine? Like hit Kiev?
Bankova, the presidential administration, the parliament, the intelligence centers, basically the center of government would be struck and decisively and eliminated. And I think that's the first step, because if Ukraine relocated to Lvov, for instance, but continued the same policies, then Russia would have to do what it has to do. But I think by striking decisively, and I think, again, you look at it's not me saying this. Russia sent a signal 5 times before the Victory Day parade on what the consequences would be, and educated everybody about that. I don't think Russia goes out there and says, I learned this from Russian ambassadors early on, especially when I was working as an arms control person, and then later in the United Nations. Words have meaning. Every word matters. No words are spoken lightly. When the Russian government commits to something, the statement that is made is crafted by people who are IMGIMO trained. These are experts in the language of diplomacy, the language of national security.
Right.
So when they tell the West, we are going to take out the decision-making center of Kiev, they mean just that. It's not.
Yeah, it's not. It's not chest thumping. It's not something Steve Witkoff thought of on the plane with a scotch.
A decision has been made. A decision has been made, and all they need now is the conditions for implementation of it. And now they've used the same language in Latvia. Decision-making centers affiliated with the launching of drones against Russia. These are military targets, command and control targets, etc. And I believe Russia, again, Narishkin is a man I respect, and Narishkin is the head of the SVR. He isn't going to come out and say these things because he's making it up. He's going to say it because they have hard facts. Again, remember the drone, the chip that the Russians gave the American air attaché? Why did they do that? Because they knew it was on that chip. They knew by giving it, the Americans reverse engineering would go, they can see that we were trying to hit this target, and the intelligence came from this source. I lost you, Rick. I don't know if you're coming back, but we hope that Rick's coming back. And in case people can hear me, the last thing we want in any broadcast is dead time, dead space. I don't know if this is my computer doing it or the fact that I'm communicating with Russia, but I hope Rick comes back. Maybe it's time now to break oil commercial. No, we lost Rick. And then I hope, well, if people are watching, this is the Rick Sanchez show.
I love that. Let me see you act like a Cuban.
I can't.
Hello, everybody. I'm Rick Sanchez. I'm a Cuban.
Let me drink some. I'll do it. But no, I forget where we were going on this. But
yeah, sorry, but I don't know what happened. It was I think because our time ran out or something because we had this.
we're almost.
I told Artie, I said, let's go over because I love talking to Scott so we can go over by a few minutes here. But I'm gonna. There's something I got to share with you that I've experienced here. So. Because you mentioned something about Witkoff and Jared Kushner and all these guys and who travel with Trump, and God bless them, I'm sure they're all nice people. But compared to the people in Russia and in China, like this guy I just interviewed a little while ago, before I interview these people in Russia, I always look at the curriculum vitae. Oh my God, Scott. They're experts to the nth degree in whatever they do. Like if I ask my staff to find me the guy in Russia who's in charge of eyeglasses, only because I will go to his curriculum today and I will find out that this guy has been either investigating, making, running eyeglass companies for the last 40 years. They're like
he invented eyeglasses.
This guy, Sergey Saragoyev, that I just interviewed, who's the premier expert in Russia on Sino relations. I asked him this. I said, "You've been doing this since like the 1980s or something." This is, and he's gone up the ladder of, and he meets with Putin, and he met with the other presidents of Russia in the past. It's not like they just found some guy and threw him in a job. No. These guys are so incredibly disciplined and steady.
When Russians use the term expert, they mean it. They don't use it lightly. There was a book written in the United States called The Outliers. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not, no.
Well, it was popular.
No, I know the principle, obviously.
Yeah, but basically, to be an expert, you need to put in 10,000 hours. For instance, the Beatles. How did the Beatles become the Beatles? Because they played 10,000 hours of concerts in Hamburg. How did Bill Gates become an expert? Because he spent 10,000 hours in the garage of his mother building computers and all that. So when people come to me and go, Scott, you're an expert. I'm like, no. I'm a specialist in many things. I have an interest. I have a curiosity. But
nuclear stuff, you're an expert.
I'm an expert in nuclear stuff. Two things I will claim expertise in. One will be on-site inspections. There's nobody that knows on-site inspections better than me because I wrote the book and I implemented it in the most difficult circumstances possible. I know it inside and out. I know everything.
On weaponry and nukes, specifically.
On weapons of mass destruction, right. But on treaty implementation, compliance verification, I'm an expert in this. I'll take that. And the other one will be, to be honest, firefighting. I was a volunteer firefighter for a dozen years, and I went to every training course in the world. I fought every kind of fire imaginable, from forest fires to house fires to chemical fires to oil fires. And I put in about 50,000 hours worth of training to this. So I'm good at firefighting, and I'm good at on-site inspection. I'm an expert. Everything else, I have an intellectual curiosity. I have a specialty. I can speak intelligently about it, but I'm not an expert. You know who scares the hell out of me? Maria Zakharova. Wonder why? Because she speaks Chinese, and her father is a Chinese expert. I mean, that's the thing about Russians. There's just nothing superficial about them at all. In America, they'll use that term expert, and there's just superficiality like you wouldn't believe. They're not an expert. You know that the moment you engage with them, you go, you're not an expert.
I was talking to Lavrov recently, and he said to me, Reek, these people, they're not serious. They're not serious. He keeps saying that. And I know exactly what he means. It's like he doesn't want to come out and be so rude to say, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. But when he says they're not serious, it's like when he told me about it, he said, we went to Alaska. We had a deal. We shook hands. We thought we were ready to move forward. And then the next thing, there's no deal. So I'm just thinking, these people, they're not serious. How do you talk to people who are not serious? And I'm thinking, how do you
the Russians
how do you talk to a Witkoff,
An interesting word. When I first heard it, I was sort of insulted because I'd given a presentation and I poured my heart into it. And it was about a topic that I consider myself being expert in, arms control. And afterwards, a Russian came up and I said, well, because I'm a human being, just like everybody else. How'd I do? Did I do okay?
You're so insecure.
I am so insecure. And he said, "Oh, well, Mr. Scott, you were adequate." I was like, "Adequate? What do you mean adequate? What do you mean adequate?" And then later on, someone said, "That's sort of like one of the greatest compliments that can be given. It means that
Yeah.
you
Did
actually
your job.
you did your job. You know what you're doing, because the Russians don't play around. There's no superficiality. You either know your
Right.
job or you don't know your job. And
Mm.
what you've pointed out is, unfortunately, in the United States today, we don't have anybody who knows Russia. When I was doing arms control, we had people who studied Russia. We had foreign area officers who were.
Yes. Yes.
We do, and you're not allowed to study. My daughter, for having the audacity as a Southern Caucasian specialist to travel to Chechnya with me and meet with Ramzan Kadyrov and all that, they tried to kick her out of Georgetown University. Her fellow students encouraged her to commit suicide, and they tried to disgrace her because she had the audacity to say, I want to know more about the topic I'm supposed to be an expert in. And that's the problem with America. You can't be a Russian expert today because they literally won't allow you to be a Russian expert. If you try to accumulate a certain amount of expertise, you're called Putin's puppet. You're called a tool of Russia.
I know.
You're called any other thing. Yeah.
I learned from my dad when I was a kid, man. My dad always said this to me about anything you build or anything you care about. He always said, son, without a foundation, your house will fall. It's never forget those words. It was like, you have to be foundational in life to get results. The Chinese-Russia relationship is what it is today because it's foundational.
No,
They
you're
have
right.
spent years building this damn thing, you know?
No,
You don't just pick a guy like Witkoff off the street because you play golf and he's your real estate buddy and say, hey, go over there and do a deal. With all due respect to Witkoff, I'm sure he's a wonderful guy and I'd love to have a beer with him, but he's not going to know what the hell he's doing.
I remember when I was in Iraq, I had designed this inspection to go after Iraq's fuel production capabilities, and I had designed it. But I was considered to be the expert on Iraqi missile fuels. I don't know anything about missile fuel, nothing. But I know how to spell it. That's about it. But we brought in a Russian team of guys who were real experts. They brought in their little lab. And so I'm sitting down having the organizational meeting with these guys. They're like, so Scott, the TGO2, the chemical compound, what's your feeling on it? I said, what? Huh? And I realized that do not sit down with a Russian expert and pretend you're an expert, because they will instantaneously know that you know nothing. Don't sit down with a Russian diplomat and try and talk about an assigned topic unless you have your act together, because they will expose you as a fraud, not because they want to expose you as a fraud, but because their depth of knowledge is so comprehensive. The foundation of knowledge upon which they are building their position is beyond.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not just the Russian. I find that with the Chinese when I traveled over there.
You've had the benefit.
It's just a different. I think we Westerners have gotten a little full of ourselves and pretend that we can kind of pretend our way through things, and I think that's.
What do you think?
Something we got to improve upon.
The dot-com bubble was. The dot-com bubble was about idiots sitting down at a bar with a napkin, designing a website, putting an IPO out, making a lot of money. They didn't do anything. They don't understand anything. We build industries today. The way Wall Street works right now is not on building a factory that produces something, but on creating concepts of derivatives.
Money. Yes, it's a money game. It's all
build nothing. It's all fake. Whereas in Russia, they build things. Again, they're experts. Your glass guy, he not only has developed the alloy for this, he ground the glass for this. He understands. I mean, and he did it all when he was 15.
I've been going since 6 o'clock this morning, so we better wrap this thing up. We're already like 15 minutes over. RTM over there, who I call Artie, is looking at me like, hey, what the hell's going on? I thought this thing was over. Oh, God, yeah. It's always fun making American names for Russians, using their Russian names. So they love me for that. Hey, dude, love you. I'll be seeing you at Spief very soon. And it's going to be a really great event this year. And I expect to learn a lot of things there. I'm going to be doing all my shows. I think I'm getting in on I'm getting in on Tuesday. I'm going to be there through Saturday for that golf tournament that I invited to that you're not going to play in. So
now, a lesson in the future. I'll start practicing. Promote me as a 12. I'll play as a 7. We'll win everything.